Hey guys, it's Layla from Ignite, and today I'm going to take you through some of the key contextual features which impact T.S. Eliot in the crafting of his poetry. Now, if you're a student that is studying the HSC, I have directed this contextual information to the Module B syllabus. But if you're not doing the HSC and you just want to know a little bit about T.S. Eliot and what influences his poetry, then you're more than welcome to keep watching. So, the reason we need to consider the context of Eliot in Module B is because as students, you need to have a little bit of an informed understanding of what key paradigms of Eliot's time, and that is the ways of thinking at the time, are going to influence the crafting of his poetry. Now, when we think about poems, or any text really, we should consider them as metonyms for their context. They're a little snapshot of what was occurring at the time. And therefore, in order to fully unlock the meaning that is contained in a poem, or in any text really, we need to be informed about what was going on in those surrounding circumstances and what Eliot might be alluding to during his time. The rubric puts it like this: students need to evaluate notions of context with regard to the text's composition and reception. I'm not going to get into the reception part of the rubric today. That requires you to consider your own context in responding to Eliot and perhaps considering what are some of the parallels you can draw between his world and your own. And furthermore, if you're using critics in your essay, which you really should in Module B, you might like to also consider what contextual features of your critic influences their particular reading of Eliot's poetry. But limiting my discussion today to Eliot's context, I'm going to focus on these three ideas, and I'm focusing on the first one in today's video, the second two in later videos. So I'm going to take a look at World War I, given the fact that Eliot was writing before, during, and after World War I, and how that contextual backdrop deeply influences the creation of his poetry. So, World War I spans from 1914 to roughly 1919, if we're counting the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. And the reason this is important is because some of Eliot's poems are written after that war period, and some of them are written before. Either way, the poems that are written before and after are still obviously going to be influenced by that contextual feature, because the threat of war as a foreboding force was around during Eliot's earlier poems, and of course poems that are written in the aftermath are going to reflect on the trauma that war experience invoked. As a starting point, it's quite interesting to consider that when the Allies, including London, which is where Eliot is situated, as a side point, he was actually an American that came to London, right? So he's looking at these contextual influences from a little bit more of a reserved perspective, because he himself didn't have that English nationalistic pride, but he's kind of like a third person assessing the implications of war in England at the time. So, as an American living in England, when England went into the war in 1914, they were quite overconfident in that they thought that the war was going to be over before the end of that year. When we fast forward 4.5 years later, the war was still going on. The implications of war on the home front were such that people were really feeling the repercussions of dragging on resources and the consistent loss of life that was occurring. You've got to keep in mind that young men were going to war thinking that they would be home before the end of the year, having only encountered a brief adventure, traveling to exotic landscapes. And this was not the reality of war experience. Men were traumatized by seeing their best friend die behind them on the battlefield. They had seen death occur on a multifaceted scale. They had experienced the hardships of weather, and this idea that their being and their existence was so minute compared to the trauma and loss of life that can occur on a large scale. So when you bring these sentiments back to the home front, we can see in Eliot's poetry a definite difficulty to reconcile mundane life and experience, having gone through all of that loss in war. Think about it. If you've experienced this trauma on a large scale, how can you move back into the mundanity of everyday life and experience and enjoy that when you know that death is such a foreboding force? And this is exactly the antithesis, if you will, that Eliot captures in his poetry. He's so aware of this foreboding force of death. He's alarmed by the rise in modernity and the potential dangers that these modern developments can cause on the individual, because he's seen them in action in forces of ammunition during the war. And all of these alarm bells that are ringing within his mind, especially having witnessed the trauma of war, make him reflect on the implications of war experience on the everyday mindset. And that's how World War I deeply implicates the backdrop to his poetry. So when we kind of summarize what I've just said about the war, the first thing to note is you'll see in his poetry the omnipresence of trauma. You see him recount the inevitability of death. Think about the fatalistic drum that comes through in his poetry. Think about his constant musings on the inevitability of death, the last twist of the knife, which is a quote I have from Rhapsody on the next page that I'm going to show you in a sec. So think about this, the omnipresence of trauma, death as foreboding, how you attempt to reconcile the inevitability of death with mundane life and experience. How can we go on with the mundanity of life if we know that death is so inevitable? Here's an example of how this aspect of mundanity and death kind of coexist within his poetry. So we've got here a quote from Rhapsody. I'm going to highlight two different parts of the quote on the next two slides. Here I want you to focus on the highlighted part, but I'll read it in full first. The bed is open, the toothbrush hangs on the wall, put your shoes at the door, sleep, prepare for life, the last twist of the knife. The highlighted part here is drawing our attention to images of mundane life and experience. The teeth brushing, the shoes, these are, I guess, symbols of the mundanity of every life. But you see them placed so proximal to very foreboding images of death. When we look at sleep, sleep is a metonym for death. If you're someone who has studied Hamlet or is familiar with Shakespeare, when you consider the famous soliloquy of Prince Hamlet, to be or not to be, sleep is used as interchangeable with death. And Eliot was very aware of actually referring to Shakespeare. He has a lot of allusions to Shakespeare's time. In fact, he directly references Prince Hamlet in Prufrock. So that awareness of what sleep represents on a symbolic level feeds into his poetry. He's aware that within this mundane existence, it is so hard to reconcile the inevitability of our own mortality, our mortal existence. And that's why, against the shoes at the door, we have sleep, right, a signal for death, and antithetical preparation for life, because in preparing for life, one must realize the last twist of the knife is going to be a foreboding symbol, okay? The knife also being symbolic for death. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that, yes, the implications of World War I must be taken into account within your analysis. You have to think about that contextual backdrop, but you must work that into what's actually in the subject matter of the poems. I've spoken about how World War I elucidates the, I guess, triviality of everyday life, because it's hard to live in a mundane world when you know that death is so inevitable. And alongside that, you have this inevitable awareness that death is going to come. So in this exact example, I've shown you how you can bring in that contextual feature and look at the antithetical placement of mundanity and mortality within his poetry. I hope you guys have found that useful. I think it's really important that you take into account the contextual backdrops of Eliot and directly relate them to your analysis. If you'd like to know more about modernity and psychoanalysis, please stay tuned for our other videos. Like and subscribe, and I'll be coming at you with a lot more content. Thanks guys for watching. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching once again. If you are enjoying our content, and we hope you are, please do like and subscribe to our channel, and of course, share with your friends.
That's right guys, thanks for watching, but please do make sure you check out our very special resources. They're quite unique. We've made a whole bunch of state rank practical guides for all your English texts out there. So check out the link now at ignitehsc.com.au. Let us know what you think, otherwise we'll see you in the next video.